I try to integrate those different perspectives by thinking of the rituals that the Hierophant performs as creating, not as empty rituals, but as rituals that create an emptiness that is waiting for spirit to fill it. And that hanged man, then, to me, is that descent of spirit. It's that bird driving down into the darkness, and it just happens. It just comes. And then we get all of the integration that we see in the sun.
Yeah, I like the way that happens. I mean, and it fits perfectly, I think, with just that idea of the hangman being equated with that concept of reversal or inversion, where I think, before we were building things up, and now we're actually, opening a space for something to enter.
So again, I'm Joy Vernon with the Greater Seattle Tarot Meetup, and today we're talking about fermentation, and this is the 5th of our 7 stages of alchemy. And so we're changing it up. So we've been doing a certain format, which I've really liked and has worked really well, and John and Penny have really liked it, but I think we wanted to stir the ferment and start to really get things bubbling, and make sure everything was getting, you stir it to make sure everything's getting mixed up in that air and oxygen is getting down to everything, and so that ferment bubbles even faster. So that's what we're going to do, is we're going to stir things up a little bit today. So I'm going to go first with the facts and figures, the solar part of the presentation. However, I have modified it slightly to allow for a little bit more introspection on your part and maybe a little sharing at the very end. Let me share my screen now. Okay. So tarot and the 7 stages of alchemy, fermentation. And one of the main emblems for the fermentation stage is the rebus, which means 2 things, I believe, and that's usually shown as a hermaphrodite or as a 2-headed being, like a Siamese twin type of thing. So here are some of the basic fermentation emblems. I'm not going to spend any time on that because Penny's got you covered there. So one of the things about fermentation, now you know that we've been studying the 7 stage format. There are different formats. There's a 3-stage, which is the blackening, whitening, reddening. There's 4 stages, which adds yellow into that. And this actually corresponds to the yellow phase. Then there are sometimes even more stages than that. And then there is the 12-stage system. And so sometimes certain stages kind of get mushed together. So fermentation gets mushed together with putrefaction. And it occurred to me that a really nice emblem for putrefaction is a 10 of Swords. It represents ruin, depression, and total loss. And so I wanted to start our talk today by asking, this feels a little bit like we're going back to calcination, and in some ways that's really true, but when have you felt this in your life? When have you felt just that total sense of utter emptiness? Just nothing is going right, nothing is working, everything is lost. Think of a time when that either it can be a recent time or something you might be going through now, maybe not total loss, but something that is difficult that you're going through, or it could be something from the past. Think about that for just a second and kind of get the feeling of that. What does it feel like? What does your body do when you think about that? How do your thoughts move when you think about that? How does your breathing, what happens to your breathing when you think about that? The beginning of the Bible, in the first book of the Old Testament, Genesis, talks about in the beginning. And it says, the second verse is, and the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. That phrase, Spirit of God, is in Hebrew, Ruach Elohim. And it means Ruach is the spirit, wind, the mind, the breath. It's something that moves. And even the word moved upon the face of the waters, that word moved means to hover, to flutter, to brood, like a brooding hen on a nest. The fermentation stage corresponds to philosophical Mercury, which is the alchemical essence we call spirit of salt, sulfur, and mercury, body, soul, and spirit. Mercury is spirit. And it also corresponds to the planet Mercury, which is the mind and breath. And so this idea of this enlivening force that hovers over that putrefaction, that's what we're talking about today. So the transforming spirit. Fermentation is the transforming of juice or sugar and water into alcohol. This natural process happens spontaneously when something rots. Fermentation releases bubbles, symbolic of spirit, the breath of the divine. Fermentation includes a process of putrefaction. Putrefaction is the rotting of an organic substance, often accompanied by the release of gas. Fermentation and putrefaction kind of is the first part of that, and then the fermentation is when that rotting material starts, or decomposing material starts to release the gas bubbles. It happens naturally, but it also can be engineered. The conjunction stage from last time resulted in what we call the lesser stone. There was kind of an object that came out of that. And the fermentation stage is symbolically vivifying that stone with this idea of spirit. A client I had drew the 10 of Swords in answer to her question. I asked if she was suffering from depression, which is one of the meanings of that card. She confirmed. We spent some time experiencing the image. I pointed out that depression leaves us feeling empty. But how do we fill that emptiness? With painful thoughts? That's one reading of the sword, the slashing emblem of the mind. Or with divine light, bright polished metal flashes with brilliant illumination. Think of your 10 of Swords moment. What can you or did you fill the emptiness with? A student asked me about the awkward hand position of the figure in the 10 of Swords. In the Hindu practice of hand positions called mudras, the thumb is the fire finger, while the ring finger is the element earth. Touching the thumb to the tip of the ring finger reduces fire and increases earth. Covering the tip or more of the ring finger with the thumb, putting fire over earth, increases fire. So putting the earth finger on top increases earth, and just touching the two tips, that increases earth. This increases fire, and it can be done across the first two sections of the finger, or just that first one section. That's called the Surya mudra, which is the sun mudra, or the Agni mudra, which is the fire mudra. And sometimes they differentiate. I've heard one being just the first phalanx of the finger being, I think, Surya, and the other one being Agni, and I've heard that it's all kind of the same. So if you look very closely at our 10 of Swords here, what's that guy doing? His little finger, his pinky, There's his index finger. He's covering the tip of his index finger with the thumb. So the fermentation stage returns us to the element of fire, like calcination, except on a higher spiral at a higher level. And so I invite you to perform this mudra to overcome the desolation of your 10 of Swords experience, to infuse your difficult experience with the living energy of spirit. I'm not going to read all of these because I want to give us a little extra time to kind of talk about some of our experiences. I will go through a few details on this. The fifth stage finds spirit in the solution. Fermentation is a more refined process of purification, a spiritualization of the matter. At this level, we make a sacrifice of the material for a new spiritual life. We experience divine inebriation as spirit enters our lives, the energy and excitement of discovery, the ferment of pure, focused, collegial minds coming together, the feeling of knowing your purpose. The emerald tablet says, separate the earth from fire, the subtle from the gross, gently and with great ingenuity. And the title on the Azov is Invian Discover. It's associated with the planet Mercury and the Greek god Mercury. Mercury has that unique ability to travel between the worlds. He can go up to the realm of the gods, Mount Olympus, and he can also travel down into the underworld, Hades, and return from it, which most gods can't do. And so it's his job to lead and guide the souls into the underworld after death. Mercury in medical astrology is cold and dry, like Saturn, interestingly. He's melancholy, or the melancholic temperament, but also light and fast. So light and fast gives us applies that melancholic temperament to the nervous system. If you have a lot of Mercury in your chart or a debilitated Mercury in your chart, then you probably have problems with nervous energy, maybe anxiety, and so on. Mercury is clever, dexterous, and agile. It's also restless, anxious, and nervous. And so Gemini, Mercury rules Gemini and Virgo, and Gemini is associated with mental diseases, while Virgo rules the digestive system. And so all of a sudden you're like, that's interesting. Digestion, that's putrefaction. And Gemini is the mind and these ideas. And we were just talking about what ideas do I bring into my putrefaction? And so my question to you is, what do you digest, literally or figuratively? How does that affect your temperament? How does it connect body to soul? That's one of the things Mercury does is connect salt and sulfur. Mercury spirit connects body and soul. More to the point, what does whatever you're digesting, what is that connecting you to? The metal is quicksilver, and the primary thing with that is that quicksilver amalgamates, makes amalgams. It actually dissolves other metals and mixes with them. And Mercury, the use of quicksilver has been very useful for getting gold out of ore, and that's one of the main things it was used for, and that is why it's at this late stage in the alchemical process, because it's getting us closer and closer to our purified, rarefied level, the highest level of gold. And our thema mundi, from lead to gold. And so I put up a diagram for us. Remember that in the thema mundi, In our alchemical version, we start over here at Aquarius and go backwards, following the planets that rule each one. So Aquarius was Saturn and Pisces was Jupiter. Aries was Mars. We did Taurus and Venus last time. Now we're on Gemini and Mercury. From here, we just go to Cancer, the moon, which is silver, and Leo, the sun, which is gold. So the fifth step is Gemini, the twins. One is mortal, one divine. That's the body and the soul. We discover our immortal self at this stage. Gemini is a social sign, connecting with others, inspired by ideas, reveling in communication, exalting in the human experience. At this stage, Gemini is associated with neighbors and the people that are around us and close to us. These frauders and soarers in spirit confirm our own sense of ourself and purpose, but they expand on it, magnifying our ideas because there's communication and interaction. We revel in how aligned we are and explode in realizing how vast we are. These are our cards, and I know they will be discussed later on. I will quickly say that the Magician is Mercury, the Lovers is Gemini, the Hermit is Virgo. Robert Place associates death with putrefaction and strength with fermentation. And we can see the solar and lunar energies combining there. These are the Minor Arcana cards, which unfortunately I would love to go into, but don't have time. And our cards in the 7x3 table, which I think John is going to lead us through this time. So here is my final question for you. Your experience, what do you fill your emptiness with? What moves you? What fires you up? How do you embody your soul? And we only have a couple minutes, but I am going to stop sharing and invite you to give some thoughts to this, give some responses. How do you fill your emptiness? What moves you? What fires you up? How do you embody your soul? So feel free to unmute yourself and let me know. Okay, we've got a good comment over here. Psychiatry is learning how the gut and brain are connected. Basically, okay, so the digestive system and the mind, excellent. We know that the digestive system is involved in serotonin production. Very interesting. I think this may be why a lot of folks with mental illnesses and other neurological issues have digestive problems. Fascinating. Okay, so how do you fill up your emptiness? A good movie, studying astrology or tarot. Okay, good. What are some other ways that you guys, Elizabeth?
I turn to a lot of introspection, like spending more and more time alone, just away from people, which is hard to do. But even at work, like, if I don't have to interact with someone, then that's great, because then I can just work alone,
Yeah.
It's just more productive. I start going in my mind and looking at patterns about just life, like everyday things, past patterns. What have I learned? How can I change things? What can I do? And then of course, tarot helps as well, reading for myself and then gaining insight from that.
Excellent. Really nice. Talking to people. Somebody says talking to people. Yeah, getting another perspective sometimes helps. Time alone in nature, reading, one-on-one or small group conversations. Yeah, for sure. Learning, writing, engaging with people like I do in classes, presentations like this. Okay, that's an extrovert. So yeah, the extroverts are going to be a little bit more fermentation, and the introverts are going to be a little bit more putrefaction, maybe. Coffee, cats, watching YouTube videos on random subjects, and of course occult studies. Yeah. Any other thoughts of how you fill up that emptiness? Introvert here, definitely putrefaction, solitude, meditation, music. Oh, spirituality, trying to learn how to learn about yourself, looking for videos on affirmations, law of attraction. Okay, great. Okay. Is there a new one? Okay. The idea of connection to expand my view or experience is an interesting reflection. Good, 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 good. The vagus nerve connects the brain to the gut. Right. Yes, you can do exercises to stretch it and to reset it. Yeah, there was, I saw a YouTube video on that. There was I forget if you're supposed to do something with your arms, but I remember you're supposed to turn your head to the side. I do remember something, and do something with your eyes, look all the way to the side and turn your head or something. Oh my God, I recently learned about that. Yes, it's often used on trauma work. So yeah, that one's popular right now. Okay, cool. I hope this got you feeling like applying this to your life to get us started. I'm going to hand off to Penny now.
Joy, that was awesome. Amazing. I think you're best yet. Really great. Thank you so much.
Yeah, for sure. It's your idea to mix it up. So I owe it all to you.
No, that was wonderful what you did. Okay, so now we're gonna do the slideshow portion that, as Joy mentioned, in the past classes we've been doing. First, we kind of, as she said so eloquently, kind of wanted to ferment the process and see what happens if we shake things up a bit and switch the order, this time giving a little bit more context to the images that we're going to look at. So keeping in mind, since the stage, as we just learned, is split into the two sections of putrefaction and fermentation, the slideshow in the beginning will kind of reflect more the putrefaction phase, which I, fortunately for all of us, chose not to include certain images that could describe that. But there'll still be a few images that are, perhaps a little bit more, profound or show some depth than some of the stuff we've looked at before. And then we'll kind of ease. There's sort of a transition period that happens in between those two, and we'll see that and then end up with more the fermentation before John speaks to those tarot keys. One other thing is at the end of the slideshow, for those of you who have been here before, you'll remember, and for those of you that are new, we do sort of a modified version of the oratio from the Lectio Divina method of looking at image or text and in a non-analytical or explanatory way, sharing our insights and our feelings about that, using just one word or a very short phrase. When we get to that point, there'll be sort of a reminder slide, sort of explaining that. But basically it's, you're not explaining what you see or analyzing it. You're merely observing and then saying a word, like you could say the color blue, or if you see a cat, you could say cat, or a short phrase. Today, we're going to split that up. The first image we look at is going to be purely observational. So you'll just out loud share what strikes you observationally only. And then the second image we look at is going to be emotional and more experiential. So you'll share more how something makes you feel, again, in a shortened way with one word or a very short phrase. So when we get to that point, you can kind of review that instruction. The slideshow itself should be 6 or 7 minutes as we have some time to look at different images on this phase, much of which comes from the book that we're loosely following, the Dennis Houck book. Which one are we? The Sorcerer's Stone is the one we're using? Yes. And just from some other sources as well, images that refer to this stage. Okay, so this next image we'll see from the Splendor Solace is one that will observe quietly, but then when you're ready to share out loud, some sort of observation on the content itself, or a connection that you're making to any of the other images or any of the things that Joy talked about. We definitely invite you to out loud say that, and no need to worry. If you speak when someone else speaks, it'll happen. You can just repeat yourself, or if you even want to say something that's already been said. But the main thing is that you're not speaking in an analytical or explanatory nature. You're sharing your observations.
Guidance.
Red flower.
Mountains.
New growth.
Reflection.
Alive.
Red wing, white wing.
Inspiration.
Tranquility.
Beauty.
Halos. So before we move to the next image, just a reminder, sorry, this will take a second to advance to the next slide. On this next image we'll see is going to be more of an experiential or emotional basis. You can still make an observation as you did before, but maybe think about adding something more, how it makes you feel, or a connection that you make to any of the other images.
Looking up to achieve.
Natural growth.
Happiness.
Tangled.
Ascension.
Flourishing.
Trying to learn alchemy.
That's a good one. The combination of nature and man's handiwork.
And supports. Where the wood's supporting the wood, you know, when people support you.
Yeah, very good.
Jack and the Beanstalk.
Nice.
Ascension.
Very good. Thank you so much. Let me. That was wonderful. Thank you all for sharing. And I do have a handout that I'll attach in the chat that just is thumbnail versions of all these images that explain kind of what their title is in terms of sort of from some of the source material, and then their photographic source as well. So I will upload that now, and we will move into into John's portion of the presentation.
Welcome everyone again, and now we move on to the section where it is said to be where we examine the synthesis of what the two phases that we've just passed through. One being the more the solar ideas of facts and figures, and then the lunar experience of the image experience that we've just went through there. And then we're going to combine this into what Howe calls a stellar experience, a stellar examination of the process. And we want to do this in the context of the 3x7 tableau. This is the column that we're going to be examining in terms of each of these columns represents a stage of alchemy in the tableau. We started at the the left column, the devil, strength, and magician is calcination. The next column represents the next stage of dissolution and so forth. Now we're at the stage of fermentation. And I wanted to also do a little bit of stir up an agitation and starting the discussion not with any of the top or the bottom, but starting in the middle here with the hangman. Because I think this is, the hangman is a really pivotal part of this process of fermentation and an apt symbol for what goes on here. So just to open up the discussion, what are some key words that come to mind with the hangman?
Inversion, sacrifice, new perspective.
Taking a break.
Head in the sand, or as in that case, on this picture, head in the dirt, but yeah.
So yeah, one of the things like, the words, so particular sacrifice is a particularly important keyword here in terms of how we're examining it in the context of the process of fermentation. And what is being sacrificed here?
Autonomy.
Beg your pardon?
Autonomy, sort of freedom, because he's hung with one leg. I see it as potentially decision making because he has one leg free, but then one leg is tied. So.
And by the way, I cannot see the chat, so if anyone else can read it.
I can read it because we've got some good things coming in here. Different perspective, things not being as they seem, sacrificing control. What's being sacrificed is connection to the earth, opinions.
Mm-hmm. Connection to the earth is a big one right there, because what is happening here, I think, in this case, at this point of all the stages in the operation, we have the first four of them, we're dealing with things that we're really just kind of like working with ourselves, so working with our inner life. And a lot of it's basically like just kind of taking our own personal machines apart, cleaning the parts, putting them back together again. But now it is time for a new identification of the new life that is promoted here after the stage of conjunction. When we combined the masculine and the feminine parts, or the soul and the spirit in the previous operation, we get a new entity. And there's a lot of references to the child of the conjunction, which is the lesser stone. So in effect, we're kind of we're creating a new personality for ourselves, and one that's based on more spiritual principles. So one of the things we're sacrificing here is our old ego once and for all.
We've got a couple more comments in the chat. Sacrificing a doctrine, sacrificing our assumptions, what is known. So yeah, right up along with what you're saying.
Is everyone familiar with the term the dark night of the soul? And that's one of the things too that this card is referencing. And then a lot of times I go, Hawk does make a reference to this in terms of the initial putrefaction process, in which he describes it more as like a stopgap between personalities. So we're in the process of relinquishing the old one. And now we're still in that gap before we, have our new selves, our spiritual selves, properly broken in, so to speak. So it's kind of almost like maybe a little like a Bordeaux, a suspension between personal identification, and that could be a really scary place to be. There's also another concept I'd like to introduce too with this particular card, and that is of the concept of the experience of the collective unconscious. Is everyone familiar with that term?
Yes.
So it is Carl Jung's idea of a transpersonal unconscious element to all of our personalities, and that this card is a representative of that experience of confronting that particular transpersonal wellspring. I think one of the ways that Jung had described the experience is that he experienced it as an inversion of consciousness itself, and where it was no longer the subject to the object, but he was more the object to the subject. As someone had mentioned earlier too, that the hanged man's head was hovering beneath the ground, and that was, and you can see it's like his head is like it has that halo effect, and that's kind of where that the center of his ego is at the moment. It's like in his personal identification, and now it's being submerged. So maybe with that, I can probably just we'll go ahead and we'll add the next card into the discussion. And we'll just move on. We'll consider the sun. I mentioned earlier that the hanged man could be it's a representative of that gap between selves. And this could be as a representation of the regenerated self that is in the process of fermentation itself. And one of the things that heralds that process of fermentation beginning is the appearance of the ferment, which is the yellowing, which the alchemists call the citrinius. So this represents that first stage of that happening. So in astrology, what does the sun usually signify?
The self.
Hmm.
Who you are at your core, who you are as an individual.
Kingliness, rulership comes up in the comment.
So I guess too is like, the question here is like, which self is this?
Well, it's interesting with the TDM style image with the boy and girl. Well, the TDM is indecisive as to the gender of the two children, but the BOTA, of course, makes it really clear. But just the relationship between that and the rebus or hermaphrodite, the coming together of the and unification of the of the genders, which is a Mercury thing. I didn't touch on this part in my slideshow, but the Mercury glyph combines the solar disk, which is the masculine, and the lunar crescent, which is the feminine, over the cross of the elements, which is the earth or the body. And so, yeah, it brings up a lot of the things that we've looked at and talked about.
Could also act as a callback to for some of the previous or the things we were dealing with in the previous operations. We were dealing a lot with discovering, at least in the past two of them, we were discovering those two essential components of soul and spirit, which were often also described as solar and lunar, feminine and masculine, and it's basically our two vital sides. And here we have that that echoing here, but it's in the form of children. I think it's suggesting too, it's like that even with the fusion of that conjunction that we had of the masculine and feminine, we're still working with two very, they're still working on somewhat of a, their own levels in a way, but they're working together a lot more harmoniously.
Well, these two children can also be looked at as the same two that are in the Lovers card as well as the Tower card, having gone through those steps and phases, as the Sun is a card of regeneration and rejuvenation as well. And so it's like their new rebirthed selves after all the steps in between. The rebirthed consciousness that they represent in Key 6, the Lovers.
It's interesting you mentioned that too, because the Lovers is in the next column, as well as the Death card, which is also often equated with putrefaction. So it's almost like we got these little references to other alchemical processes in the other ones.
Okay, so here comes one of my little things. In looking at the two young figures in the Sun card, they each have 1 foot in one zone, and they have another foot in a zone that is nature growing. So my brain says, okay, one foot is connected to spirit and the other foot is connected to nature, and in such they're in balance. And then I look at the Hangman, and he's got 1 foot connected to a tree, nature, and the other foot is loose in the air, meaning wind and spirit. So I just saw that connection between the two. And so, I mean, I don't know what that means in terms of putrefaction and fermentation, but I know that life requires fermentation to grow. If the bacteria weren't fermenting the material in the soil and making the nutrients available to the trees and the plants, then the plants couldn't grow. So you can't disconnect the two. They feed each other. It's a constantly ongoing process. And I don't know what it is about this Hangman, but there's just something about him. It's much different from the Rider-Waite card. He actually, to me, I get the feeling like he's having a hell of a good time.
Well, in most cases, I mean, it's not the esoteric versions of the card. The sacrifice is voluntary.
I've read of people going into a state of bliss before they're sacrificed. There's something about the brain that kicks out the endorphins so that they don't feel the pain of the sacrifice. And I know that in many cultures they'll feed a sacrificial person a concoction of various and sundry mind numbing drugs.
Well, now that you mentioned that, Jimmy, it's fair to point out that that ring in the sun card there is a fairy ring, which is basically it's a ring of mushrooms.
Oh, yes, and of course, mushrooms perform the act of putrefaction.
Mhm.
There's another comment coming in, the halo on the hanged man. The halo on the hanged man looks like a smaller version of the sun, except the face on the halo is his own face. It's almost like he transforms into the sun in the next card. The face and the halo on the hanged man parallels the sunflowers with the seeds inside. His expression is similar to the sun's face as well, neutral.
One of the other things about the fairy ring, as well as it's often referred to as the ring pass not, which is seen in Blavatsky's Secret Doctrine, basically as a symbol for as your consciousness evolves and your the illusion of separation lessens its hold, that once that happens, you know, it's kind of like you can't really go backwards from that. And so that's another thing that the children, the placement of their feet about this ring also represent, is that true regeneration of the awareness of the illusion of separation.
Right, and then on another level, it could also be, you know, that we have the masculine and feminine operating in both the inner and the outer worlds. Or you could say, another application symbol is with the subconscious and the conscious simultaneously.
And somebody in the chat says, since this is a fairy ring, they have one foot in another world and one foot on the earthly plane. That sounds really appropriate for the things we're talking about.
So maybe we'll throw in.
Sorry, the other thing is, like with the hangman, he's got the moon symbols on his tunic. So, you know, that could be night and then the sun day. And his halo could be lightening up so that we can see him. But it could actually be nighttime as well.
Yeah, when I was looking at these cards, preparing for my slideshow, I thought of the scarab. Which in Egyptian mythology, it's first of all, it is one of the symbols for Mercury because it's a dung beetle and it plants its eggs in dung and rolls up these balls of dung, which then gives, so to speak, gives life to its own young. But also this, mythologically, the scarab takes the sun through the underworld. At night, basically, so that it can be reborn in the morning at dawn. And both of those, and that is shown in the Thoth moon card, and shows kind of the inner and outer expression of that solar lunar energy. And somebody says here, sun revealing higher self and hence brightness and hope. Nice.
Let's go ahead. I'm going to throw in our third card, which is going to be the Hierophant here. Because we were talking now about, you know, that again, that interaction between the imbalances between masculine and feminine, solar and the lunar. And we have the same thing happening in the Hierophant, in some of the symbols that are represented here. We have, on the one hand, you know, we have the two acolytes, one dressed in, you know, his tunic is decorated with roses. The other one, his tunic is decorated with lilies, representing, on one hand, we could say, you know, thought and desire, respectively, or irrespectively. I'm sorry, I got those switched around. But you could also look at those as the components of spirit and soul, the solar and the lunar aspects, and they're wearing yokes that are yoking them to Hierophant as a representative of higher spirit, or, you know, a spiritual realm. So the Hierophant, in his role as, you know, the spiritual authority on earth, is the connection between the mundane and the divine. And the the infusion of matter with spirit and the recognition of spirit in matter. There's also, I think, one of the things that was mentioned about, this particular stage in the alchemical process too, is the appearance of Hermes as a guide. And you could, the Hierophant has been seen as a representation of Hermes Trismegistus, with the triple layered tiara. And I don't know if anyone can see clearly there, but his just underneath the Hierophant's chin is another lunar symbol.
And then under his feet, there are 4 symbols, 4 astrological symbols of the earth. The circle with that cross in it, that's the astrological symbol of the earth, I think. So he's got his feet grounded to the earth.
Or 2, I mean, it's a group of 4. We've just gone through 4 stages of alchemy already.
Yeah.
And perhaps the basis for which this higher work is what he's standing or sitting on.
The keys are different colors, so they could be different metals as well.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
Sorry.
Yeah, the silver, it's a silver and gold is what they're usually considered to be, and another reference to moon and sun and solar, lunar, masculine, feminine, and all of that.
Often what I see, and when you bring up the earth symbol, which is the cross inside the circle, then you can see there's all kinds of crosses in that tarot key right there. And there's a cross on the keys itself, and there's some crosses on his shoes, and there's one on the back of his hand. And that to me, I mean, I think we touched on this when we were talking about the conjunction, that we were talking about 2 specific types of unifications. One was a more earthly, left and right, masculine and feminine balance. The other was the vertical, the connection between the earthly and the spiritual. So we have both of those axes represented here, I think both by the Hierophant and in some cases the sun. But definitely with the Hierophant here, he's emphasizing the more vertical balance, or the vertical connection that we're trying to achieve here with the fermentation process, is going from the old self to the new spiritual self.
It's interesting that with this stage of fermentation, where we really see kind of the first spiritization of this process, and kind of after that, lesser stone and plateau of that's reached in conjunction in that first earth stage, here is where we actually see like that real first transformation of that lesser stone. And these 3 cards, the 3 Hebrew letters, Vav, Mem, and Resh, form to spell a word in Hebrew that means to change or exchange. And so I think that's a good connection with the fermentation phase with these 3 as well.
We've got another interesting comment. It's interesting how the buttons and belt on the hangman's tunic not only form that symbol for earth, that cross, but also seem to divide the Hierophant from the sun. It looks like a crossroads. And of course, one of the associations for Mercury or for Hermes is the crossroads, particularly the idea of the herm, or the boundary marker, the stone that marks boundaries. So yeah, some really interesting stuff going on there.
The crossroads too is a good, was like where you usually meet the trickster, isn't it?
Yeah, yes, Mercury definitely is that as well.
Yeah.
I had happen multiple times when I had a class devoted entirely to the magician card, an alarm was set off. And the first time I actually had the cops show up. And the second time an alarm went off, but nobody showed up, which actually had me concerned about the lack of security when that alarm went off. But yeah, definitely a trickster.
The three of these cards together too also speak to those three prime elements, you know, with the Hierophant and the letter Vav as air, or the Ruach as part of Tetragrammaton, and then the Mem as water and the Resh as fire in the form of sun and light. We once again have the combination of our prime three elements as well.
Are there any other observations that anyone wants to share about these three cards in relation to fermentation? And in a way, sometimes I feel like, yeah, well, I mean, in this sense too, it's like I just looked at the Hierophant as the top of the column, and then in relation to the tops of the columns of some of the other stages too, and then particularly the last one. The top of the column was the Emperor, who was a representation of worldly authority. Now we have, it's almost like, you know, the Hierophants now, it's like tapping on the shoulder of this new conjuncted personality that we've got. It's like, wait a minute, there's a higher authority here that it has to get to.
Sorry, go ahead, John. Something just hit me.
No, go ahead and say it.
So in looking at three cards, from shamanic mythological perspective, whenever you see a pair of objects, it represents a portal from one dimension or one state of consciousness to another. And I'm looking at each of these three cards now, and I'm seeing a portal with a shining light between them. The Hierophant, who in the Greek, the Hierophant literally means a guide to the unknown. So the Hierophant sits between the two pillars. He wears the sun on his head in the form of the crown. The Hangman is between the two pillars. He wears the sun on his head in the form of a halo. And in the sun card, you have the two useful figures with the sun in between them in full display. So in many ways, what I'm seeing now is I'm now seeing a story in linear time. The Hierophant says, do this. The Hangman does that. And the sun says, this is where you get. And I just realized they're linearly connected in that way.
That's exactly right, because I mean, that's in keeping with the model of this particular tableau, where we have the top card is the cause, the middle card is the law or the process in which that particular law takes effect, and then the last card, the base card, is the effect that it achieves.
This is the first time that I've been able to actually, the images, it's taken a while for me to digest them, but it just popped up and went, wow, this is the first time of the three sets of three cards where to me it really just hits me in the face. That's amazing. Okay. I'm thinking I'm liking this deck more and more and more. I should get mine out and color it in.
No, thank you for making that observation.
Well, thank you for putting it there for me to see. I appreciate that.
I have often looked at the Hierophant. People often talk about empty rituals with the Hierophant dogma. The Hierophant gets a pretty bad rap, but there is some truth and some relevance to that. The Hierophant is certainly more about the structure of religion than about the spirituality of it, or the mysticism of it or anything like that. It's very structure oriented. But a lot of times I try to integrate those different perspectives by thinking of the rituals that the Hierophant performs as creating not as empty rituals, but as rituals that create an emptiness that is waiting for spirit to fill it. And if you've ever done ritual work every day or meditation every day for an extended period of time, you know that there are days where you just can't, I mean, you do it, but you're just not showing up. And all you can do is just be there and say the words and do the actions or sit still for a certain amount of time. And you're like, okay, why did I even bother? But there is something very important about doing that, even when nothing works, or even when you're not getting some kind of result from it. Empty rituals are fine. Empty rituals are not bad. Empty rituals are saying, I know that this is doing something. I know that this is important. And maybe it was empty today, but at some point, spirit's going to come into that emptiness and fill it. And I've used that meaning for many, many years, and I find it very relevant to our sequence here. Creating that space, doing the work, doing the labor of the alchemical process, whatever you're trying to do. And sometimes there's nothing we can't force spirit to come in. We can only create the emptiness for that. And that hanged man then to me is that descent of spirit. It's that bird driving down into the darkness. And it just happens, it just comes. And then we get all the integration that we see in the sun.
Yeah, I like the way that happens. I mean, and it fits perfectly, I think, with just that idea of the hangman being equated with that concept of reversal or inversion, where I think, before we were building things up, and now we're actually, opening a space for something to enter.
Well, and the hangman is also gestation as well, with its relationship to 40 in the letter mem. And its relationship to the Empress card as well. So it's, and then the Empress Venus has that connection to the Hierophant Taurus as well. And so the Hierophant also kind of serves as that middle conduit between the Empress and the Hanged Man as well, in its lettership of Vav, or that link or connection between the above and the below, which is a role that in the structure that Joy was talking about, that a pope or priest would play, or a hierophant in this case.
All right. Well, I think, it's probably a good place to stop here. So thank you very much for all of your input on this. I hope this makes it a little more, it adds another dimension to understanding the process that we're talking about.
Yeah, that was very interesting. Some really good stuff. So do you guys have your tarot decks with you? I'm good. This is what I'm going to do. I'm going to start by sharing my screen for a minute to show you the tarot spread, but I'm not going to share it the whole time. I did that last time, and it's basically a big ugly handout in the middle of the screen, and you can't really see me in the video part, which kind of doesn't matter right now, but you guys don't really need this. You can pull it up yourself on the screen, but this is what the handout looks like for the spread. And what you'll need for this spread is your tarot deck, of course, and some note-taking materials. And we're working with those cards we just discussed here in the 7x3 table: the Hierophant or Pope, the Hanged Man, and the Sun. And so go ahead and start by pulling those 3 cards out of your deck. And I'm going to do I'll do the whole process along with everybody so that I can which I think helps with the timing. Well, I'm obviously having trouble finding one of my cards, so I'm going to go ahead and read the next instruction. So once you've got your 3 cards, and we've done this every time, but of course I'll go over it with everybody. But in Oswald Worth's discussion of the 7x3 table, he assigns the top row the idea of the subject of a sentence, the center row as the verb, and the bottom row as the object. So the Hierophant is our subject of the sentence, the Hanged Man is our verb, and the sun is our object of the sentence. And so the first thing you're going to do is come up with some keywords for each of those. A keyword for the Hierophant is the subject of your sentence. Think of a word for the Hierophant that is relevant to you and that you could apply here. And then a verb for the Hanged Man, and an object of the sentence with the sun. And I'm going to take just a minute. I didn't say this before, but I'm in my new office. I have a new office, and I just started seeing clients here just a couple days ago. But I have it mostly set up, but not entirely, and I don't have usually the desk that I'm sitting at has a drawer with pen and paper in it, and I'm not at that desk, so I need to go and find my pen and paper. So one moment, please. Oh, and I want to point something else out. I'm using my my tarot, the Old Path today. You get it near the camera. That ring light is really bad. But a lot of tarot decks have coins falling out of the pouch on the Hanged Man, and one of the emblems that was in Penny's slideshow, and variations of that are in other alchemical texts, show the idea of planting coins in the ground. And so yet another really fascinating connection between the Hanged Man, between our cards in the 7x3 table and the actual alchemical emblems.
Can I just share something else I saw in the progression through the cards?
Yeah.
So the Hierophant, with his feet heavily on the ground, he's got 4 symbols of the earth there. The keys have the earth symbol. Very, very grounded, very much covered in red, the color of life. Only a little bit of blue showing around his, well, I've got the Rider deck, so only a little bit of blue showing right around his neck and just under his feet. And if you consider, this is not that a whole lot of gold over his head. In the Hanged Man, now we have almost an equal amount of red and blue, and the gold around the head is growing. So as the earthly influence recedes, the spiritual influence has room to grow. And in this particular card, the earthly influence is this tiny little feather, and then the whole background is blue, and the gold of the illumination is huge. It's just another progression I'm seeing through these 3 cards. It just hit me like a whack.
Love it. Love it. Okay, so we've got some things coming in. Mediator sacrifices illumination. Teacher is waiting for energy. I really like that one. That's me quite a bit. Someone just said I'm seeing my cards differently now with the different perspective. I think that is structure, practice, reframes, full expression. Really nice there. Download, new perspective, transformation. Nice. Okay, good. So I came up, I'm kind of a little distracted and multitasking, but I did come up with something. I've got the teacher sows gold to be reborn. The director provides functional instruction that when followed leads to glorious results. Nice. Okay, good. Okay, cool. So now I have to change this. Go over here. Now we've got our subject, verb, object in a sentence. So think of the thing. Okay, so this whole time, since January, we've had an intention that we've been working with, something in us that we wanted to change. And that first class back in January, we thought of something within us we wanted to change and what we wanted that result to be. And so if you've been working with us the whole time, we're starting to get, now that we've gone through all these previous stages, we're getting to the point where we're now really seeing this result. The thing that we wanted to change, we've really worked on quite a bit. Now we're looking at that, how we want to be, or the thing that we want to happen. And so we're starting to work with that end result. We're starting to see it and be able to start to refine it and work with it. And so so think of the thing that you wanted to change into, or the end result that you want, the outcome. And if you are just new, just joining us, by all means, we had thought of something that would maybe take 10 months to change and transform in our lives. You don't have to pick something that broad. You can pick something that you can change over the next 3 months through the end of the program, or you can just pick something that you can change over this course of this upcoming month, or even just today. It doesn't matter what size it is. And so think of that thing that you want to change. And the first spread position 1 is to focus on the Hierophant and the word or phrase you came up with. I saw director, teacher, and some other things like that. Think of that word that you came up with and ask, what is this? What is this for me? And then draw a card randomly to represent the subject. Then same with spread position 2, concentrate this time on the Hanged Man and its verb. What is that for me? How does it express in my life? And then for the third card, the Sun and the object of our sentence, what is this for me? How is it expressing in my life? And so then you'll have a 3-card spread, and you'll do an interpretation of that. And so your subject, verb, and object that you came up with are basically, in many ways, they are the spread positions for this 3-card spread that you're doing right now. Take some time to do your interpretation, jot down your ideas. Ultimately, what you want to do is do the interpretation first and think what these mean to you. How, what makes sense about them, how you understand them. And then look at the 3 images and think of what detail in the image, what visual cue in the image most most triggered your thought, your interpretation, most inspired your interpretation, and jot down those 3 visual cues that most closely align with the interpretation you wrote down. So now you've got your interpretations written down and your visual cue from each card. So you've got 3 visual cues. For me, on one card, it was the determined look in his face, kind of the set of his brow and a determined look. In this one, it was the white feather or quill pen that he's using. And for this one, it was the apple, which I wrote at length what those things meant to me and why it inspired my interpretation. And so now I'm going to look through my deck and try to find a single card that has a combination of a determined look, a white feather or a pen, and an apple. And it seems when you start, it seems like it's going to be impossible, but you find pretty quickly that it's very It's not as hard as you think it's going to be. Really interesting. I think I found it already. Of course, if you know your deck pretty well, you might just be able to think of a card that fits the bill. And I do know of several. For instance, my most difficult thing to find is an apple, but I know which cards in this deck have apples in them. But my first one that I found is really the one that I want. And so that final card then is your synthesis card, and it represents your alchemical transformation for this fermentation stage, your personal process or unique path to achieve the alchemical operation of fermentation. So we have just a couple minutes left. I maybe spent a little bit more time doing this than usual. On my own, without the camera running, I would certainly spend a lot more time. But this is kind of the fast version. Does anybody want to share what they got?
Well, for the Hierophants, I pulled out the Five of Pentacles. So asking for help. And it's around about Christmas time, I started to go back on Meetup and join these groups. And tarot was my main thing, but I've started joining other groups for other things. So that's been really good. So for my Hangman, I got the Queen of Cups, which is creative and intuitive. So I'm learning through the help of groups like yourself. It's been, and looking at the cards differently. And then for my Sun card, I've got the Two of Wands, planning, looking to the future, planning. So yeah, it's very interesting how it all come out with your 3 cards that you've worked on today. So thank you.
Yeah, excellent. Good. I think we're at time. Thanks, everybody. I hope that you're enjoying this and that this process has been helpful.
Thank you, everyone. This was great.
And we've got some comments coming in. Great class. Love this. Thank you very much. Yeah, you're welcome. Absolutely.
Thank you very much, Joy. This has been fascinating. By the way, I drew the star card. I mean,
Nice.
I didn't draw. I mean, I drew the Queen of Swords to go with the Hierophant. I asked, since the Hierophant is a director giving of instructions, I asked what that might look like to me. And it comes up with a caring elder female giving me good instructions. And then the Hangman is contemplating, what are they going to have to give up?
Oh.
Because in order
Wow.
in order to make room for illumination to come in, there's junk you got to get rid of. So it's a lot of junk I got to get rid of. and then for the Sun, it's like, what is the glorious illumination? I drew, interesting enough, I drew the 9 of Pentacles, which is
nice.
completely yellow and bright and illuminated. And the synthesis of all of it was the colors of blue and gold and illuminate. And I drew this, which is to me a process of always letting go so that there's room for something to come in.
I love it. Beautiful.
Just like putrefaction and fermentation, it's an ongoing cycle. It never stops.
Beautiful. Love it. And we've got tons of really nice comments in here, thought-provoking. Thanks for letting me join. Thank you. I'm inspired. Thank you. Wonderful as always. Thank you. Great learning experience. See you next time. Good. Excellent. Yeah, see you next time for sure. Inspiring and invigorating. Excellent. That's what fermentation should be.
So long, guys. See you next time. Thank
See
you
you
so
later,
much,
Cheryl.
all of you.